The decision to issue an arrest warrant against me was made by a rogue prosecutor and by biased judges, nor did the court do anything against the Hamas terrorists who raped our women, beheaded our men, burned babies alive in front of their parents. Come to think of it, the court did issue one arrest warrant against Hamas, against the corpse of the Hamas arch-terrorist Mohammed Dev. Israel will not recognize the validity of this decision.
This video is an official statement that was just released by Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel, in response to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issuing a warrant for his arrest, which is obviously a hilarious joke, except it's not funny. But, you know, this is not about Bibi. Love him, hate him, respect him, dislike him. Let's listen to what he says and judge his statement on its merits. And you know, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to share some thoughts afterwards as well about his statement and more about the points that he makes in his statement as broader issues. So let's have a listen.
The anti-Semitic decision of the International Court in The Hague is a modern Dreyfus trial, and it will end the same way. 130 years ago, the French Jewish officer Alfred Dreyfus was falsely accused of treason by a biased French court. In response to these false accusations, the great French writer Émile Zola wrote his monumental essay, J'accuse. He accused the French court of anti-Semitic lies against an innocent officer who was later exonerated of all guilt. Now an international court in The Hague, also headed by a French judge, is repeating this outrageous offense. It is falsely accusing me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and Israel's former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, of deliberately targeting civilians. This when we do everything in our power to avoid civilian casualties. We issue millions of text messages, phone calls, leaflets to the citizens of Gaza to get them out of harm's way, while the Hamas terrorists do everything in their power to keep them in harm's way, including shooting them, using them as human shields. The court in The Hague accuses us of a deliberate policy of starvation. This when we've supplied Gaza with 700,000 tons of food to feed the people of Gaza. That's 3,200 calories for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. And these supplies are routinely looted by Hamas terrorists who deprive their people of much-needed food. Yet just in the last few weeks, Israel facilitated the vaccination of 97% of the people of Gaza against polio. This doesn't prevent the court of accusing us of genocide. What in God's name are they talking about in The Hague? The truth is simple. No war is more just than the war that Israel has been waging in Gaza after Hamas attacked us unprovoked, launching the worst massacre against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. The decision to issue an arrest warrant against me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and our former Defense Minister, was made by a rogue prosecutor who's trying to extricate himself from sexual harassment charges, and by biased judges who are motivated by anti-Semitic sentiments against the one and only Jewish state. These judges did nothing. They did nothing against the real war crimes committed against the millions who've been murdered or uprooted by the dictatorships in Iran, Syria, and Yemen. Instead, they falsely accused the one democracy in the Middle East, Israel, thereby imperiling the right of all democracies to defend themselves against murderous terrorists and tyrants. Nor did the court do anything against the Hamas terrorists who raped our women, beheaded our men, burned babies alive in front of their parents, and kidnapped hundreds of men, women, and children to the underground dungeons of Gaza. They're still holding 101 hostages, citizens of many lands, including the United States. Come to think of it, the court did issue one arrest warrant against Hamas. Now hear this. They issued an arrest warrant against the corpse of the Hamas arch-terrorist Mohammed Dev. His corpse. What an absurdity. No biased anti-Israel decision in The Hague will prevent the State of Israel from defending its citizens. And I want to thank our many friends around the world especially those in the United States, who've condemned this outrage and who have said that this decision will have severe consequences for the ICC and those who cooperate with its decision. Israel will not recognize the validity of this decision. We will continue to do everything we must do to defend our citizens and defend our state against Iran's axis of terror, Iran and its terrorist proxies, which include Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others. Our enemies are your enemies, and our victory will be your victory, the victory of civilization over barbarism and tyranny.
Yeah, I mean, Bibi's sometimes can be a little over the top and dramatic, but at the end of the day, what he's saying, it is what it is, plain and simple. I mean, I would say two things. First of all, before I get into the details, I want to say that in a way, I'm actually happy that the ICC did this because they've, spoken the quiet part out loud, as they say. They've lifted the mask and shown beyond any shadow of a doubt that they are an absolute joke as an organization, and they have zero credibility. They mean absolutely nothing, and nothing about them is worth taking seriously at all. The reason why this is so absurd and such a joke, I would say there are two big, completely separate reasons. Two things that are a complete joke about this. Number one is that the claims that they make, and I'm going to read that quote out in a second, the claims that they make against Bibi Netanyahu and Gallant they're farcical. They're literally a joke. They make no sense. That's first of all. And second of all, the selectivity with which they decide what they're going to pursue and what they're not going to pursue shows very clearly that they're just a subjective group of people who follow up on things and chase things on a whim, depending on what they personally feel like, on who they feel like prosecuting, and what, whoever it is that they personally feel like trying to get in trouble, trying to reprimand, trying to punish. So I want to actually read out the claim, and this is a direct quote of what the warrant is for. It's for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, right? It's illegal to use starvation as a method of warfare. And the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. So, other inhumane acts is a beautifully precise legal definition. That's fantastic, fantastic legal work there, other inhumane acts. Well, let's go through these in order. Right, using starvation as a method of warfare. Israel has sent into Gaza enough food for every single person in Gaza to be overweight. They've sent in enough food for everyone there to need to go on a diet to reduce their weight. Now, if everyone there is not walking around overweight, that's got nothing to do with Israel using starvation as a means of warfare. It's absurd. It's a joke. Do the people there have access to food? Maybe not. And if they don't, why not? Everybody knows the answer to that. We all know the answer to that question. The answer to that question is one word: Hamas. Israel sends in food. Hamas steals the food. They kill anyone else who tries to take the food. They murder people for trying to take the food that they want to steal. And they are responsible for starving the people who they are officially, governing and responsible for. But let's not worry about that. Let's just focus all our attention on Israel and Bibi Netanyahu, because they're really bad people, because they're Jewish. This whole thing is ridiculous. Starvation, using starvation as a method of warfare. It's literally just obviously and blatantly and explicitly factually incorrect. Israel's been supplying electricity and water forever to Gaza, free of charge, sending in enough food for everyone to be overweight, but they're guilty of the crime of using starvation as warfare. And then murder. Bibi is guilty of additional crimes against humanity, including murder. Who did he murder? People are dying. It's war. People die in war. Civilians died? Yes, civilians died in war. Do you know that the UN officially made it, the official UN estimate of average expected civilian to combatant death ratio in war, right? That's a standard figure that can be calculated. It's the ratio of civilians who are killed for every combatant who's killed in war. And the term, the ratio, the metric exists because it's a thing that happens in war. Unfortunately, civilians get killed. The fact that civilians got killed doesn't mean someone's guilty of murder. Right? The UN says that the average civilian to combatant ratio is 9-1. That means they expect on average that in war, for every combatant who gets killed, 9 civilians get killed by mistake or collateral damage, whatever you want to call it. All equally tragic. The civilian to combatant ratio, by all available estimates in Gaza over the past year, has been in the ballpark of 1.5, between 1.2 and 1.8, depending on where you look, civilians per combatant. And that's in urban warfare. That's urban guerrilla warfare, that having to go into Gaza where the terrorists embed themselves in schools, in refugee camps, in hospitals, literally hide behind women and children. And the lengths that Israel has gone to try to minimize those civilian casualties are extraordinary. Israel has sent something like 12 million texts, 15 million recorded messages, voice messages, I don't know how many thousands of written notifications, that they're letting people know where they're going and what they're going to do, even though that almost defeats the purpose of the operation, because Hamas knows exactly what they're going to do and when, but they do it anyways to try to minimize civilian casualties. No army on earth has ever done anything like that. And to say that what they're doing is not murder doesn't mean that any civilian deaths are not tragic. But tragedy doesn't equal murder, and for the ICC to issue an arrest warrant for murder during this war that has historic record low ratios of civilian to combatant deaths for any war, certainly for urban warfare that looks like this, is I mean, again, it's a joke. It's literally a joke. And so then the second, part of this, and the reason that this is a joke, is not just because of the farcical nature of the claims that literally don't make any sense on their face, but it's also the fact that even if there would be the possibility of validity to their claims, it's not like this war between Israel and Gaza is the only place where things like this are happening, or the most egregious example anywhere in the world, that's why this is where they need to put their focus and attention. Talk about the numbers of casualties. There's been a war going on in Syria for 13 odd years now. In that war, the number of casualties have been nearly exactly the same as they've been this past year in Gaza, almost exactly the same every year for 13 years straight. It's over 500,000 people killed in that war. The ICC is not rushing to try to prosecute anyone, issue any arrest warrants. Oh, they don't have jurisdiction in Syria. That's true. You know where else they don't have jurisdiction? In Israel. Yet, they'll go and find any loophole they can and include the non-existent state of Palestine and Gaza as a jurisdiction that they can use as a loophole to try to issue arrest warrants against Israel, when that's actually against the foundational rules of the ICC, because the UN rejected their attempt to do that, but they went ahead and just considered that anyways. So Syria's been having almost identical death toll for 13 years straight. Not a peep. Right? There's all kinds of travesties going on around the world, but out of all of them, this is the one that they decide to prosecute and to go make a whole big deal out of. Not any of the others. Nothing in Iran, nothing in Syria. They don't have jurisdiction again. They don't have jurisdiction in Israel either. But they went out of their way to find loopholes, didn't they? I wonder why. I wonder why they don't prosecute. They're not interested in another war that looks almost identical in terms of numbers, but for 13 consecutive years straight and still ongoing. But here, all of a sudden, they're rushing. You know, it's like the South Africa's case that they brought to the ICJ is a similar thing. ICJ is not ICC; it's a separate court that's in the UN. But South Africa is prosecuting Israel for war crimes and being an apartheid state. I understand South Africa has a complex about apartheid. I don't blame them for feeling guilty. They should feel guilty. Their history is a travesty. But the fact that they have a complex about apartheid doesn't mean that they therefore can or should start making up things that claims Israel's apartheid. That's the biggest joke of all. Right? The Israeli government's full of Arab Muslims. The Israeli Supreme Court has Arab Muslim judges sitting on it. I mean, not to mention professionals, doctors, lawyers, everywhere you look, the claim that Israel's an apartheid state is a joke. Again, like just literally on its face. But, I understand. I get it. South Africa has a complex, and, this is the way that their complex is being expressed. Okay, it happens. But, again, all said and done, in a way, there's a part of me that thinks that maybe this is a good thing, because now the mask is off, and the ICC has clearly shown that it's literally a joke. It has, its credibility is like absolute zero. It's not 0.01%, it's 0.00%. It's worth nothing. And at least now we know. So there you go.